on powerful abused women. This is the Me Too movement on steroids. I mean, if you were shaping the ultimate kind of case, very rich person, very privileged, knew everybody, gets the best lawyers to cut an outrageous deal that shuts the victims out, right? And then proposes, well, here's how you can treat me now. Why don't you let me live in my multi-million-dollar mansion? There's no element of this that doesn't feed conspiracies. And I was struck over the last day or two that non-conspiracy people were saying, hold it. Wait a minute. This makes no sense. Yeah. There's a very famous New York case, a mobster named Abe Kid Twist Rellis, who was about to testify against Murder Incorporated, was stashed in a hotel in Coney Island, guarded by police, somehow managed to jump out the window the night before he testified. Now, you don't have to be a New York historian to look at this case and go, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it, and I don't think this is beginning to be over. You know, not to mention one more thing, as you say, the fact that the President of the United States is retweeting the most ridiculous conspiracy theory. And once again, you think the establishment on his side has said nothing about it.
So, amid all of those conspiracy theories, leaders from both sides of the aisle in Congress are now demanding answers as to how Jeffrey Epstein was apparently allowed to kill himself while in federal custody. We've heard from Elizabeth Warren, and in a furious letter to the Justice Department, Republican Senator Ben Sasse blasted the DOJ for the circumstances, writing in part that the Department of Justice failed and Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators think they must have just gotten one last sweetheart deal. Every single person in the Justice Department knew that this man was a suicide risk and that his dark secrets couldn't be allowed to die with him. Given Epstein's previous attempted suicide, he should have been locked in a padded room under unbroken 24/7-hour constant surveillance. Obviously, heads must roll. Carol, what discussion is there from the congressional side of trying to get to the bottom of this and hold people accountable if indeed heads do need to roll over this?
Well, there was a lot over the weekend about how concerned members of Congress are about it, in part because it looks so horrible that victims basically shut out of the process in 2008, caught unawares that Jeffrey Epstein had gotten this incredible sweetheart deal. Now they have one more chance to face their accuser, and that's gone. Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing, really, when you think about how this could have happened. I have never seen an attorney general, by the way, issue a statement about a dead prisoner before. It tells you just how serious this is politically. Notwithstanding the president's own interest in it, there are conspiracies on both sides. But the real, I liked what Jeff said, that it's so serious because even serious people are going, that's convenient that he's dead. It's just too odd.
It is too odd, Mike Barnacle. And you know, I glibly said this weekend, you know, a very rich and powerful man who has powerful connections with presidents and billionaires and princes, et cetera, who's going to testify against them, ends up dead in his jail cell. And I said, it sounds how Russian. I could have said, it sounds, following up on what Jeff Greenfield said, this is what we did see in mob cases. This is what, you know, what we saw. Well, The Godfather, obviously, based on a lot of mob cases as well. It makes no sense. There's no way the Justice Department should have left this man sitting in that jail cell by himself. And there is no explanation that the Attorney General, there's no explanation the Bureau of Prisons can give. There's no explanation that anyone can give to explain why he was. And whether that launches a million conspiracy theories or not, this Attorney General and this President have a lot to answer for.
Joe, I'm kind of old-fashioned, and I'm probably like Jonathan and Peter Baker and Carol, who are here this morning with us. You know, I used to prefer to wait for a few of the facts of the story to come out before you make a judgment, but boy, this is a real test. This is a real test. Yeah. And the idea, and Carol referenced this right away, that the undermanned and overtired staff at the Manhattan Correctional Institute, you know, they've been forced to work overtime. Joe, this is a small, confined space we're talking about. They weren't being asked to run a marathon. You know, they could have checked on that prisoner, you know, a couple of times an hour, but they didn't.
And by the way, Mike Barnacle, if you're the Attorney General of the United States and you know that they're holding the most important prisoner in the world as far as testimony goes,
yeah,
you're going to say, keep your eyes on him 24/7. It's pretty interesting that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is still alive today. The United States government somehow managed to keep Khalid Sheikh Mohammed alive. They managed to keep alive terrorists or terror suspects that they needed to testify or they needed information for the September 11 attacks alive.
Yeah.
That wasn't that difficult. And here, again, you're talking about a man who had information on some of the most powerful people in this country over the past quarter century, and you can't keep him alive? I mean, the Attorney General should have bent over backwards given Donald Trump's own past with Jeffrey Epstein, his own relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. If the president had nothing to worry about, then the president should have bent over backwards, and the Attorney General should have done the same to make sure this man stayed alive.
And guess what, Joe? Even with the psychiatric release of, you know, we can take him off a suicide watch now. You have a psychiatrist talk to him.
That's ridiculous.
A couple of times a day. The warden of that institution could have said, I don't care about that ruling. I'm going to keep him on suicide watch because there are people who come into institutions like this, and once they hear the clang of those doors behind them, they know their freedom is gone and they are incapable of handling it. Let's watch them.
You know, and Peter Baker, it's so funny, these conspiracy theories that were blowing up over the weekend where Donald Trump was blaming the Clintons and other people were blaming Donald Trump. There is so much mud on both sides. I mean, be careful what mud you toss, you know, if you're living in a glass house. It seems to me that both sides have been implicated in this, and there's no clean, clear conspiracy theory that you can posit on the internet that might not boomerang around and hit somebody on your own side.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if, in fact, the one reason the president went ahead and tweeted those things is to make sure that his version of the conspiracy theory is the more prominent one, rather than until, you know, somebody came around to him or something like that. And you had this fascinating exchange, rather extraordinary exchange, of course, where you have a sitting president in effect suggesting that a former president was somehow complicit in the death of an inmate, and then the former president's own office then fires back suggesting that the sitting president was mentally unfit because the statement they put out suggested that the 25th Amendment should apply, the 25th Amendment being the one that includes a removal provision cases of incapacity. That's an extraordinary exchange. That's sort of like even a sub-story here, not even the main story. Never would have seen that more than 2 years ago.
In some ways, this is a story of the rich and the powerful. It's not a matter of Republican and Democrat. It's a matter of the wealthy and those who stand outside the system in some ways. Jeff, you made this really important point about our cultural moment. In some ways, we're overrun by reality TV. And this seems to be perfect for reality TV. It seems to me that this has to be resolved quickly and transparently if we're going to not, in some ways, deepen distrust among everyday ordinary people in the way in which our systems work.
That's a critical point because, as a general point, the belief across the spectrum that the system is rigged, whether Donald Trump asserts it or Elizabeth Warren, is been simmering for quite a while. You can't find a case that more perfectly illustrates that than this person with bipartisan friends and the money to hire the best lawyers. And the whole thing about this weekend, punctuated by the president's tweet, I felt poleaxed. I felt that this was so far beyond the norm that it's almost to the president's benefit that you're paralyzed by just sheer shock that this could be going on. The last thing I'll say is the next time a Supreme Court justice comes before the Senate committee and they intone no one is above the law, I think one senator should get it a list and say, let me start reading you the names of the people I think have been above the law. Because until the last few months, Jeffrey Epstein